There's something you've been carrying that no one has named yet. The room is quiet. Your phone is face down beside you. The day is ending the same way so many others have ended lately. You checked for a message you knew probably wasn't there. You told yourself you wouldn't think about them tonight. Yet somehow, here you are again. Not because you're weak. Not because you're obsessed. Because something unfinished keeps pulling at a corner of your heart. And if that sounds familiar, then this conversation is for you. Sometimes the hardest part isn't losing someone. It's not knowing where you stand. It's living in that strange space between hope and certainty. Between holding on and letting go. Between believing there is something real and wondering whether you've only been talking yourself into it. You know that feeling, don't you? The feeling of replaying conversations long after they've ended. The feeling of reading meaning into pauses. The feeling of trying to act normal while carrying questions nobody else can see. Most people around you only notice the surface. They see you working, smiling, responding, moving through your day. What they don't see is the quiet conversation happening underneath all of it. The one that keeps asking the same question. Why hasn't this happened yet? That question follows people into places they never expected. It follows them into grocery stores, into morning drives, into sleepless nights, into random moments when a song comes on, and suddenly they're thinking about someone they promised themselves they wouldn't think about anymore. And the strange part is that waiting changes shape. At first it feels hopeful. Then it feels confusing. Then it starts feeling personal. Slowly, almost without noticing, people stop asking why something is delayed and start asking what's wrong with them. That's where the real pain begins. Not when someone doesn't call. Not when a relationship hasn't started. Not when life feels uncertain. The deepest wound appears when delay gets translated into worth. When silence becomes evidence. When waiting becomes a verdict. You may never say those words out loud. Most people don't. Instead, they carry them privately. They wonder if they're attractive enough, interesting enough, important enough. They compare themselves to strangers. They study details nobody else notices. They replay mistakes from years ago as if those moments somehow explain everything happening now. And little by little, patience becomes heavier than it was ever supposed to be. What makes this especially difficult is that the human mind hates uncertainty. Researchers have found that uncertainty creates stress responses that can feel surprisingly similar to physical discomfort. In other words, your exhaustion may not be coming from what happened. It may be coming from not knowing. That changes everything. Because many people have been fighting the wrong battle. They think they're struggling with another person. Often they're struggling with ambiguity. They're struggling with unanswered questions. They're struggling with unfinished stories. And unfinished stories are powerful. The mind keeps returning to them because it wants resolution. It wants certainty. It wants closure. You know that feeling too. You finally decide you're moving on. Then something small happens. A memory. A dream. A familiar name. A photo. Suddenly the story feels open again. Suddenly the questions return. Part of you wants to stop caring. Another part isn't ready. And somewhere between those two parts, a deeper fear begins to grow. What if this delay means I'm not enough? People rarely admit that fear directly. They disguise it. They call it frustration. They call it confusion. They call it bad timing. Yet beneath all of those words is often the same hidden wound. The fear of being unwanted. The fear of being overlooked. The fear of not being chosen. Stay with this for a moment. Because what comes next matters more than it might seem. Many people assume that if someone truly cares, everything should happen quickly. Feelings should be obvious. Communication should be immediate. Decisions should be clear. The right person should arrive and instantly remove uncertainty. It sounds reasonable. It's also one of the most painful beliefs people carry. Because real life rarely works that way. In fact, some of the deepest connections begin with hesitation. Not certainty. Hesitation. That surprises people. We grow up hearing stories about instant recognition, immediate clarity, perfect timing. Yet reality often tells a different story. Sometimes people move slowly because they don't care. Sometimes they move slowly because they care more than they expected. There is a difference. Someone who feels nothing risks nothing. Someone who feels everything often becomes careful. Suddenly, every decision matters. Every conversation feels important. Every possibility carries weight. And weight changes behavior. Think about the moments in your own life when something truly mattered. Did you become reckless? Or did you become cautious? Most people become cautious. They think harder. They hesitate longer. They analyze more. Not because the opportunity lacks value, because it has value. That distinction is easy to miss when you're the one waiting. Waiting turns every day into a mirror, and mirrors can be cruel when you're hurting. You begin interpreting events through fear instead of reality. A delayed response becomes rejection. A period of distance becomes disinterest. A complicated season becomes a final answer. Yet sometimes none of those interpretations are true. Sometimes you're reading a chapter and calling it the ending. You know where this gets dangerous? When people start abandoning themselves while trying to understand someone else. They spend hours analyzing another person's behavior. Meanwhile, they stop listening to their own heart. They stop noticing their own growth. They stop seeing their own value. Everything becomes focused on one question. What are they thinking? But there is another question hiding underneath it, one that matters far more. What has this waiting been teaching you about yourself? Most people never ask that question because they're too busy looking outward. And that's understandable. Pain naturally pulls attention toward whatever seems responsible for it. Yet every season of waiting reveals something. Sometimes it reveals fear. Sometimes it reveals attachment. Sometimes it reveals hidden strength. Sometimes it reveals wounds that were already there long before another person entered the picture. This next part matters more than it might seem, because the delay you're experiencing may not be exposing your value. It may be exposing the places where you've accidentally tied your value to someone else's choices. And those are not the same thing. Very different things. One is about who you are. The other is about what someone else is doing. The trouble begins when those two become tangled together. A person takes longer than expected. You question your worth. Someone seems uncertain. You question your worth. Life unfolds differently than planned. You question your worth. Notice the pattern? The circumstances change. The conclusion stays the same. And when the same conclusion appears regardless of the situation, it usually means the issue runs deeper than the event itself. Because the event is not creating the wound. It's revealing it. That realization can feel uncomfortable, but it can also be freeing. Because what is revealed can be healed. And what is healed no longer controls you. The question is not whether waiting hurts. It does. The question is whether the pain is telling the story you think it's telling. And that is where everything begins to change. And that is where everything begins to change. Because there comes a moment in every season of waiting when a person faces a choice they never expected to make. Not the choice between staying and leaving. Not the choice between hope and surrender. A deeper choice. The choice between interpreting the delay as proof of their inadequacy or seeing it as information that has nothing to do with their value. Most people don't realize how often they confuse those two things. A flower does not bloom in winter because it lacks beauty. A seed does not fail because it remains beneath the soil for a season. Timing and worth have never been the same thing. Yet human beings blend them together every day. You know that feeling, don't you? You see someone else's relationship moving forward, someone else's engagement, someone else's happy ending. Suddenly your own timeline feels broken. Not because anything changed in your life that day, but because comparison quietly entered the room. And comparison is persuasive. It speaks softly. It says everyone else is being chosen. It says everyone else is moving ahead. It says everyone else has found what you're still waiting for. The problem is that comparison never shows the full story. It shows outcomes. It hides journeys. It shows celebrations. It hides struggles. It shows arrivals. It hides preparation. And preparation is where most transformations happen. Not during the visible moments. During the invisible ones. Think about the strongest people you've ever met. Most of them were not shaped by easy seasons. They were shaped by uncertain ones. The periods where they couldn't see what was ahead. The moments when they had more questions than answers. The stretches of life where all they could do was continue walking. Those seasons taught them things certainty never could. Patience, discernment, emotional stability, self-respect, the ability to remain steady when circumstances refuse to cooperate. And strangely enough, those qualities are often exactly what future relationships require. Many people ask why the relationship hasn't arrived. Far fewer ask whether they're becoming the version of themselves that can sustain it. There is a difference, a very important one. Because receiving something and being ready for something are not identical experiences. A person can receive an opportunity before they're prepared for it. A relationship before they're emotionally equipped for it. A blessing before they're mature enough to protect it. And sometimes what feels like a delay is actually preparation happening beneath the surface. Not only within you, within them too. That possibility changes the entire picture. Because maybe this isn't a story about rejection. Maybe it's a story about readiness. Stay with this for a moment. Think back to every major chapter of your life. How many times did you later realize that something arrived at precisely the moment you were finally capable of handling it? Not when you first wanted it, when you were ready for it. The frustrating part is that readiness is usually invisible while it's happening. Nobody wakes up one morning and announces they are becoming emotionally healthier. Nobody posts updates about learning patience. Nobody shares every private lesson life is teaching them. Growth often happens quietly, silently, almost unnoticed. Until one day you respond differently. Until one day you stop chasing. Until one day you stop begging for clarity from people who cannot provide it. Until one day you discover a steadiness that wasn't there before. And suddenly you realize you've changed. Not dramatically, deeply. What comes next is quieter, but it's the part that stays. Because there is something many people misunderstand about meaningful connections. They think the purpose of the right person is to complete them, to fix loneliness, to remove insecurity, to heal every wound. But no human being can carry that responsibility. Not sustainably. The healthiest relationships are not built by two incomplete people desperately trying to rescue each other. They're built by two individuals who have learned how to stand on their own feet. People who know who they are. People who can give without disappearing. People who can love without abandoning themselves. That kind of connection requires growth. And growth rarely feels exciting while it's happening. Most of the time it feels slow, uncomfortable, unclear. Yet some of the most important work of your life may be happening right now, even if nobody can see it, even if you can't fully see it. Because patience does something remarkable. It exposes what desperation hides. When we're desperate, we accept things we normally wouldn't. Mixed signals, half-hearted effort, relationships built on potential instead of reality. We settle because we're afraid waiting will last forever. Patience interrupts that pattern. It teaches discernment. It creates space between emotion and reaction. It helps us recognize the difference between what we want and what is actually healthy. And that lesson alone can change an entire future. Because not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay. Not everyone who captures your attention deserves your commitment. Not everyone who sparks chemistry is capable of sustaining connection. Those distinctions matter a lot. The person meant for you may not simply be testing your patience. Life may be using patience to protect you from choosing incorrectly. That perspective feels different, doesn't it? Because now the delay isn't only about waiting. It's about filtering, refining, preparing, protecting. And suddenly the season begins to look different. Not easier, different. The pain is still real. The uncertainty still exists. But the meaning starts changing. Instead of asking, why isn't this happening? You begin asking, what is this season creating within me? That question opens doors. Because now your attention returns to the one person you actually have influence over, yourself. And that is where real transformation begins. Not when someone chooses you. When you stop abandoning yourself while waiting to be chosen. Many people spend years believing they need a certain outcome before they can feel secure. A certain message, a certain relationship, a certain commitment, a certain answer. Yet emotional security rarely arrives through outcomes. It arrives through identity, through knowing who you are before circumstances confirm it, through recognizing your value before another person acknowledges it, through standing firmly in your own life while uncertainty remains unresolved. That kind of confidence cannot be taken away by silence, or distance, or timing, because it was never built on those things. It was built on something deeper, and that realization closes the first question that has been following us since the beginning. Why does the waiting hurt so much? Not because it proves you're unworthy, because uncertainty keeps trying to convince you that your worth depends on an outcome. Once you see that clearly, something loosens inside. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to breathe differently. Enough to stop carrying every delay as a personal judgment. Enough to understand that patience and value have never been enemies. They were simply mistaken for each other. And once that misunderstanding begins to dissolve, another question emerges. A question many people avoid because it feels risky. What if the person meant for you is also struggling right now? What if their silence has a story you cannot see? What if what looks like distance from your perspective feels like confusion from theirs? What if the delay is not happening because they don't care, but because something inside them is still unfolding? That question has changed countless lives. And the answer may be far more surprising than most people expect. And the answer may be far more surprising than most people expect. Because one of the hardest truths about human connection is this: you rarely get to witness another person's private battles. You see behavior. You do not see the entire story behind it. You see hesitation. You do not see the fear creating it. You see distance. You do not see the wounds influencing it. You see silence. You do not hear the conversations happening inside their mind. That gap between what we see and what actually exists has ended more relationships than most people realize. A person assumes they know what someone's actions mean. Then years later, they discover they were completely wrong. Not slightly wrong. Completely. There are people who looked uninterested while secretly feeling overwhelmed. People who appeared distant while trying to heal. People who seemed uncertain while quietly fighting battles they couldn't explain. Human beings are complicated. Far more complicated than quick conclusions allow. You know that feeling too. Someone says they're fine. You can tell they're not. Their words tell one story. Their eyes tell another. Life is full of situations like that. And relationships are no exception. Sometimes the most important parts remain invisible. Stay with this for a moment. Think about your own life. How many struggles have you carried privately? How many fears have you hidden behind normal conversations? How many nights have looked calm from the outside while feeling chaotic inside? More than most people know, which means the same may be true for others. This doesn't mean every delay has a beautiful explanation. It doesn't mean every person is secretly preparing for a future with you. Reality requires honesty. Some people truly are unavailable. Some people truly are confused. Some people truly are not the right fit. But there is a difference between recognizing reality and creating painful stories without evidence. One leads to wisdom. The other leads to suffering. Many people spend years suffering because they convinced themselves they understood a situation they never fully understood. And assumptions are powerful. Once the mind creates a story, it begins searching for proof. Every detail becomes evidence. Every silence becomes confirmation. Every delay strengthens the narrative. Before long, the story feels true simply because it has been repeated often. Yet repetition does not create reality. It creates familiarity. And familiarity can be misleading. This next part matters more than it might seem. Because there is a story about two people that illustrates this perfectly. Not a fairy tale. Not a fantasy. A very human story. A woman spent years believing she had missed her chance with someone she deeply cared about. The connection had been real. The conversations had mattered. Then life became complicated. Distance appeared. Communication slowed. Months turned into years. Eventually, she concluded the obvious. If he cared, he would have stayed. If he cared, he would have acted. If he cared, things would have been different. The conclusion felt reasonable. For a long time, she carried it as fact. Then something unexpected happened. Years later, they crossed paths again. Not intentionally. Not dramatically. A simple conversation. An ordinary moment. And during that conversation, she learned something she had never known. During the exact period she interpreted as rejection, he had been navigating one of the most difficult seasons of his life. Family challenges, financial instability, fear about the future, questions he didn't know how to answer. None of it had anything to do with her value. Nothing. The story she carried for years collapsed in a single conversation. Because the explanation had never been rejection. It had been reality. That conversation changed her forever. Not because they ended up together. That's not the important part. The important part was realizing how much pain had been created by a story that wasn't true. How many sleepless nights came from assumptions? How much self-doubt came from incomplete information? How much suffering came from believing silence automatically meant unworthiness? The lesson stayed long after the conversation ended. Most people are responding to information they don't actually have. And when certainty is missing, the mind fills the gaps, usually with fear. Because fear loves unfinished stories. Fear rushes to explain what patience is still trying to understand. And that creates problems. Big ones. Because patience leaves room for reality. Fear replaces reality. There is a profound difference. You know where this becomes life-changing. When you stop demanding immediate explanations for everything happening around you. Not because answers don't matter. Because premature answers can be dangerous. A rushed explanation often causes more pain than honest uncertainty. Many people would rather hold a painful explanation than admit they don't know. At least a painful explanation feels certain. Yet certainty is not always truth. Sometimes uncertainty is simply uncertainty. Nothing more. Nothing less. What comes next is quieter, but it's the part that stays. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with stones. Every unanswered question becomes another stone. Every fear becomes another stone. Every assumption becomes another stone. After a while, the weight feels normal. You stop noticing how heavy it is. Then one day someone removes a few stones. Not all of them. Just enough. Suddenly you realize how exhausted you've been. That is what happens when people stop interpreting every delay as personal rejection. The weight begins to shift. The heart begins to soften. Space opens where pressure once lived. And from that space, something remarkable becomes possible. Clarity. Not forced clarity. Not desperate clarity. Real clarity. The kind that appears when fear stops shouting long enough for wisdom to speak. And wisdom often says something surprising. It says not every delay is a denial. Not every silence is abandonment. Not every closed door is permanent. Sometimes life is still arranging pieces you cannot yet see. Sometimes another person's story is unfolding beyond your awareness. Sometimes timing is doing work that emotion cannot understand. If this is finding you at the right moment, comment peace below, like this video, and subscribe. There's more coming for you. Now let's close the second question that has been quietly waiting in the background. Could their silence have a story you cannot see? Yes, absolutely. Not always, but often enough that you should be careful before turning uncertainty into a verdict. That answer doesn't require blind hope. It requires humility. The humility to admit that reality is usually bigger than our assumptions. And once that realization settles in, something extraordinary begins to happen. Your focus starts shifting, away from decoding every action, towards strengthening your own foundation, away from chasing certainty, toward developing peace, away from needing immediate answers, toward becoming someone who can remain steady even when answers take time. That shift changes everything, because now you're no longer trapped in the waiting. You're growing within it, and growth transforms the entire experience. The delay stops being a prison. It becomes preparation. The uncertainty stops being an enemy. It becomes a teacher. The silence stops being evidence against you. It becomes empty space where deeper understanding can emerge. And that leads us to the realization that changes this entire story. The realization that separates those who spend years suffering from those who eventually find peace. Because the greatest lesson hidden inside waiting has almost nothing to do with the other person. It has everything to do with you. And once you see it, you will never look at this season the same way again. And once you see it, you will never look at this season the same way again. Let's go back to the beginning for a moment. Back to that quiet room. Back to the phone resting beside you. Back to the question that kept returning. Why hasn't this happened yet? For so long, that question seemed to point outward. Toward them. Toward timing. Toward circumstances. Toward unanswered messages and unfinished possibilities. But what if the question has been pointing somewhere else all along? What if the deeper invitation hidden inside this season was never about understanding another person? What if it was about understanding yourself? That possibility changes everything. Because most people enter waiting believing they need an answer. Then somewhere along the way, they discover they need something much deeper. Freedom. Not freedom from caring. Freedom from attaching their identity to what happens next. Those are very different things. You can care deeply and still be free. You can hope sincerely and still be free. You can love someone and still remain anchored within yourself. Many people never learn that distinction. They believe attachment and love are the same thing. They aren't. Love expands. Attachment contracts. Love allows. Attachment clings. Love respects reality. Attachment fights reality. And when waiting becomes painful, it is often attachment creating the sharpest edges. Not love. Pause. That realization can be difficult to hear, because attachment often disguises itself as devotion. It sounds noble. It feels meaningful. Yet underneath it is usually fear. Fear of loss. Fear of loneliness. Fear that happiness depends upon a specific outcome. Fear that life cannot move forward unless something finally changes. And fear has a way of shrinking the world. Suddenly one relationship becomes everything. One possibility becomes everything. One answer becomes everything. Meanwhile, life continues offering opportunities, lessons, friendships, growth, beauty, purpose, and experiences that go unnoticed because attention is fixed on a single destination. You know that feeling. You've been physically present somewhere while mentally somewhere else. A conversation happening around you while your thoughts are elsewhere. A beautiful day unfolding while your mind remains trapped inside one unanswered question. We've all experienced it. And slowly, almost invisibly, life starts passing through our hands. Not because we're careless, because we're waiting. Stay with this for a moment. Because this realization has changed countless lives. The person meant for you may enter your life. They may not. The timing may arrive tomorrow. It may take longer. Yet regardless of what happens, there is one truth nobody can take from you. Your life is happening now, not later, not after an answer arrives, not after certainty appears. Now, this very moment. That truth sounds simple, yet it is powerful, because many people unknowingly postpone living. They postpone joy. They postpone peace. They postpone gratitude. They postpone presence. Everything becomes conditional. I'll be happy when. I'll relax when. I'll feel complete when. But life rarely rewards those conditions. There is always another milestone, another desire, another uncertainty, another thing waiting on the horizon, which means peace cannot depend upon arrival. Peace must learn how to exist during the journey itself. Otherwise, it never arrives at all. What comes next is quieter, but it's the part that stays. Researchers who study happiness often discover something fascinating. People consistently overestimate how much future events will permanently improve their emotional state. They imagine that one outcome will solve everything. Then the outcome arrives. For a while it feels wonderful. Then life becomes normal again. The emotional high fades. The human heart begins looking toward the next thing. This happens with careers, money, achievements, relationships, everything. Not because those things lack value. Because lasting peace comes from something deeper than circumstances. And that brings us to the realization hidden beneath all of this. The waiting was never simply asking whether another person would choose you. The waiting was asking whether you would choose yourself. Not in a selfish way, in a healthy way, in a grounded way, in a way that says, my value remains intact regardless of what happens next. That statement changes people, because suddenly the pressure begins disappearing. Not all at once. Gradually. Like fog lifting from a landscape. You begin seeing things more clearly. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop chasing explanations. You stop carrying responsibility for things that were never yours to control. And something remarkable happens. You become lighter. Not because answers arrived. Because your identity stopped depending upon them. Breathe. Think about how much energy people spend trying to control uncertainty. Trying to predict outcomes. Trying to avoid disappointment. Trying to guarantee success. And yet some of the best moments in life arrived without permission, without planning, without certainty, without guarantees. Life has always contained mystery. The strongest people aren't those who eliminate mystery. They're the ones who learn how to walk beside it. And that's exactly what patience teaches. Not passive waiting, not helpless endurance. Strength. The kind of strength that remains steady even when the future remains unclear. The kind of strength that keeps loving without losing itself. The kind of strength that keeps hoping without becoming dependent upon hope. The kind of strength that understands timing and worth are separate conversations. And once you understand that, a final realization begins approaching. One powerful enough to transform everything we've discussed. Because there is a hidden reason why some people emerge from waiting stronger while others emerge wounded. The difference is not what happened to them. The difference is what they believe the waiting meant. And once that becomes clear, the entire story changes. And once that becomes clear, the entire story changes. Because the real battle was never about time. It was about meaning. Two people can experience the exact same delay and emerge completely different. One becomes bitter. The other becomes wiser. One becomes smaller. The other becomes stronger. One loses themselves. The other discovers themselves. The difference is rarely found in the circumstances. It is found in the interpretation, the story they told themselves while waiting. And that story matters more than most people realize. Because stories become beliefs. Beliefs become behaviors. Behaviors become lives. That's why this final realization is so important. The meaning you assign to this season will shape who you become because of it. Not who you are, who you become. For a long time, perhaps you've been carrying a story that sounded something like this. If they were meant for me, this wouldn't be difficult. If I mattered enough, things would move faster. If I were more attractive, more successful, more interesting, more lovable, this would already be happening. Many people carry some version of that story. Quietly, privately, painfully. Yet none of those beliefs survive close examination. Because life repeatedly demonstrates something different. Some extraordinary people wait. Some beautiful people wait. Some deeply loving people wait. Some emotionally mature people wait. Waiting has never been evidence of inadequacy. It is evidence of being human. Pause. The human experience has always included uncertainty. Always. No one escapes it. Not the confident. Not the successful. Not the spiritually grounded. Not the people who seem to have everything figured out. Everyone encounters seasons where they cannot see what comes next. The difference is how they respond. And this is where the greatest lesson of all reveals itself. The person meant for you may indeed be testing your patience. Not intentionally. Not consciously. Not as a game. Life itself may be creating circumstances that require patience. Timing may be asking for patience. Growth may be asking for patience. Healing may be asking for patience. Readiness may be asking for patience. But none of those things are asking you to question your worth. That part was never required. That burden was never yours to carry. You added it because you cared, because you hoped, because you wanted certainty. And that's understandable. Yet now it's time to set it down, because it doesn't belong to you. Stay with this for a moment. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a river. For years you've been carrying stones. Every disappointment, every fear, every unanswered question, every assumption, every moment you interpreted silence as rejection, every moment you measured your value by someone else's actions. Stone after stone after stone. The weight became so familiar you stopped noticing it. Then one day you realize something. You don't have to carry it anymore. Not because every question has been answered. Not because every outcome is guaranteed. Because the weight was never proving anything in the first place. The stones were not protecting you. They were exhausting you. And so one by one, you begin releasing them. The fear that you're behind. The fear that you've missed your chance. The fear that someone else's timeline means something about yours. The fear that delay equals denial. The fear that waiting equals failure. One by one, they fall away. And with each one, something unexpected returns. Peace. Not perfect peace. Real peace. The kind that coexists with uncertainty. The kind that remains even when questions remain unanswered. The kind that does not demand immediate solutions before allowing you to live. That peace changes everything. Because now you can love without desperation. Hope without attachment. Wait without abandoning yourself. Trust without forcing outcomes. You become available to life again. Fully available. Not half present. Not trapped inside endless analysis. Present. Open. Alive. And ironically, that is often when everything begins shifting. Not because you manipulated the outcome. Because you stopped making the outcome responsible for your identity. This next part matters more than it might seem. Many people spend years searching for signs that another person is meant for them. Yet one of the strongest signs is not found in the other person at all. It's found in what the connection teaches you. Does it help you grow? Does it invite honesty? Does it encourage maturity? Does it challenge unhealthy patterns? Does it deepen your understanding of yourself? Those questions matter. Because even when relationships do not unfold exactly as expected, they often leave gifts behind. Wisdom, clarity, healing, perspective, strength. Growth is never wasted. Never. Every lesson remains. Every insight remains. Every step forward remains. Nothing meaningful disappears. And if the person meant for you eventually enters your life, you will meet them as someone different from who you are today. More grounded, more self-aware, more emotionally resilient, more capable of building something healthy, more capable of recognizing genuine connection when it arrives. That is not lost time. That is preparation. And if the path unfolds differently than expected, these same lessons still serve you. Because they belong to you now. Nobody can take them away. Not circumstances. Not timing. Not disappointment. Not uncertainty. They are yours. Forever. Breathe. Now let's return one final time to the question that started everything. Why hasn't this happened yet? Perhaps there are reasons you cannot see. Perhaps another person's story is still unfolding. Perhaps timing is still arranging pieces beyond your awareness. Perhaps preparation is happening beneath the surface. Or perhaps life is guiding you somewhere entirely different. Right now you don't know. And that's okay. You do not need complete certainty to move forward. You do not need all the answers before continuing your life. You do not need every question resolved before allowing yourself peace. The future can remain unfinished while your heart remains steady. That is the lesson. That is the gift. That is the freedom hidden inside patience. Because patience was never asking you to shrink. Patience was teaching you how to stand. Patience was never asking you to doubt yourself. Patience was inviting you to trust yourself. Patience was never trying to prove your lack of value. Patience was revealing value that existed long before another person's decision entered the picture. And here is the realization worth carrying long after this video ends. The right person may arrive because the timing became right, but your worth was never waiting for their arrival. Everything else grows from there. The questions become lighter. The future becomes less frightening. The waiting becomes less heavy. And little by little, without forcing anything, you begin living again. Not someday. Not when certainty arrives. Not when every answer appears. Now, right here, in this moment. And somehow, quietly, gently, something inside you already knew that all along.